We're in a sermon series, and the title of the sermon series is God's Story. We're looking at narrative aspects of the Old Testament, kind of big, broad themes, and so we're covering a lot as we move from now till Easter. Jesus, in the New Testament, Jesus said he came to fulfill the Scriptures, meaning the Hebrew Bible, or the old, what we think of as the Old Testament. He came to fulfill it, or fill it full, and to give it fuller meaning, to give it, to make it more real, to make it more full, to give it its fullness of meaning. And so if that's what Jesus does, and we worship Jesus, then we want to take the time to look at how these Scriptures point us to Him. As Peter said last week, Pastor Peter talked about Adam and Eve in the garden and choosing what looked good in their eyes rather than what God had said. And so they took this fruit, and that becomes this theme that is repeated throughout the Scriptures. They took what looked good in their eyes rather than listening to the Lord. And brokenness and sin, the theme for today, is just multiplies and spreads. I'm going to cover, so we're talking about Genesis. We're actually talking about 3 through 11. Genesis 1 through 11 serves as an introduction to the whole of the Old Testament. And I'm covering chapters 3 through 11 today. That is a lot. So I'm hitting high points. If you need to take pictures of a screen, that's fine. If you want to email me and ask questions, I'd love that. Do what you have to do, jot down notes. We're going to cover a bunch of things today, and I'm going to, unfortunately, we'll go through it rapidly, but I hope to make a couple of points in particular. This is my favorite kind of photograph, where you zoom in and you don't know what's happening. This guy is he looks disgusted, maybe. This guy's mind is currently being blown. These people are obviously taking pictures of whatever's happening. This guy, he's conducting an orchestra, it looks like. And these two older gentlemen here are ready to run and flee. Something is happening. It's Cohen Carr, and he's amazing. He has a 51.5-inch vertical, which would be a Guinness record if Guinness would go to Michigan State's practice, but they don't. So this is the big picture. And when you zoom in on the details, you don't really know what's going on. And the same thing happens for us when we read Genesis. We zoom in on some details sometimes, and we miss the bigger picture. We miss the fullness of the picture that's happening, and we get stuck in the details sometimes. It's no, the guy's not conducting an orchestra. It's something else with his hands. But the big picture helps us understand what's happening overall. And that's what I want to do today, is focus on the big picture. And so I'm not going to have you stand and read when we read the Scriptures like we normally do, because I'm going to be covering a bunch in smaller pieces. But I do want to pray before we go on. So would you join me in prayer? Lord God, would you guide us this morning as we go? Would you help us to see what the Scriptures are trying to communicate to us so that we can know you more? And Lord, as we go today, it's not just know you more, it's be in your presence more and recognize that we're in your presence more. God, we love you and we give you praise. We recognize that we aren't the only church worshiping this morning, so we ask that you'd be with Church of the Lamb. Lord, would you bless them in their work and ministry in and around Harrisonburg? We ask all these things in the name of Christ, our Lord. Amen. All right. Last week, Pastor Peter talked about Adam and Eve. They rebelled against what God had said. Right after that, God talks to Adam and Eve and the serpent. And he addresses all three of them. And he says to the serpent, I will put enmity between you and the woman, between your offspring and hers. He, meaning the offspring of the woman, or this human being, will crush your head and you'll strike his heel. So page 3 of the Bible tells us that there is an offspring of the woman coming, a human being coming that is going to finally and fully do away with the serpent, right? Do away with Satan. It's going to do away with evil, do away with sin, do away with this brokenness. And so as you read this, some of you will go, I'm ahead of you. I know where we're going with this. But maybe you're new to it and you read this and you're like, well, who is this person? the offspring of the woman. Well, go to the next chapter, and the woman has offspring. Again, there's details that I'm not going into. So Cain and Abel are the offspring, the first two offspring of Adam and Eve. Some things happen, and Cain is not happy with his brother. And so he says to his brother Abel, let's go out in the field. And while they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. Okay, there's an offspring of the woman coming who's going to do away with evil. We get to the first generation of offspring, and you're like, well, this probably isn't the guy. This is not a good candidate to be the one who gets rid of evil, because we're in the first generation after the first two people, and he's committed murder. So it's not him. Things go from bad to worse. Cain kills his brother, and Cain goes, he recognizes, what's interesting is he recognizes, I bet people don't want to hang out with a murderer. And so he tells God, you're going to have to do something to help me. And God, out of his graciousness, says, I will protect you. And if anyone kills you, they'll suffer vengeance 7 times over. We talked in Genesis 1 about this number 7 in Hebrew thought and thinking. 7 symbolizes completeness or completely or universality. And so here that number pops up. You go a little further in this chapter, and suddenly you run into this guy Lamech. He's the 7th generation from Adam. And the fact that he's the 7th generation from Adam is probably meant to communicate something, right? This symbolic number that completes a cycle. Lamech marries 2 women. We have polygamy suddenly in the Bible. Sometimes people, skeptics of the Bible, critics of the Bible, will look at the Bible and go, this is in the Bible, the book that you think is holy. It is. And it's telling you that this guy is corrupt and evil and not good. And that is the entire point. It's not there because Lamech's good. It's there precisely because Lamech is wrong. He's chosen 2 wives. In the beginning, God told Adam that a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the 2 will become one flesh. Not the 3 will become one flesh. Right? So it's not there because it's good. It's there precisely because it's showing us what happens when people choose what's good in their eyes rather than listen to the voice of God. And it's just spreading and growing like a cancer. And so Lamech says to his 2 wives, somebody wounded me. And if Cain can be avenged 7 times, then Lamech, he speaks in the third person, Lamech will be avenged 77 times. It actually says 70 times 7. So here's this guy that's the 7th generation from Adam. He's taking multiple wives, and he goes, if Cain can be avenged 7 times, I will really take vengeance. I am going to fully and completely take vengeance as part of my way of living. Jesus actually uses this passage when in the Gospels, Peter comes to him and he goes, Jesus has been teaching them, and Peter says to Jesus, how many times should I forgive somebody that sins against me? And Jesus said, you should forgive someone 70 times 7 times. Jesus is referencing this ancient text that's ancient even for Jesus, and he's going, here is this guy who's the fullness of his life is about taking vengeance for himself, and Jesus tells his disciples the fullness of your life should be about forgiveness, not vengeance. And so we see even on these first pages, if you become familiar with the Bible, you recognize that it's showing you something that is connected all through. Next chapter, chapter 5. Everybody's favorite part of the Bible, genealogies. It'll be like, so-and-so begat, so-and-so who begat so-and-so, and you're like, ooh, this is definitely part I can skim. And look, I get it. It can be really strange sometimes. And so here's what I would say about genealogies. There's actually some really great stuff in a bunch of the genealogies of the Bible. And you can start by just asking yourself this: where does it start, where does it end, and who's included? Where does it start? Where does it end? And who's included? So here's this first genealogy, and it starts with Seth, who is the third-born son of Adam and Eve. Now, remember, it's not the first guy. It's not Cain that we're following. He's a murderer. It's not the second guy. He's dead. What about Seth? There's this genealogy that includes Seth, and it leads us to Noah. It's getting us to Noah, and it's describing this thing. Seth is the third-born son. Throughout the scriptures, there's this idea, or not this idea, there's this practice, and it's an ancient practice, not just with Israel, but other cultures. The firstborn son is privileged. The firstborn son is the one who receives a double portion of the inheritance. The firstborn son is the one that looks out for their father and mother. The firstborn son is the one who the family line is carried through, except this is not the firstborn son. And this is a repeated pattern in the Bible that you can pay attention to. It's often the one that God chooses is not the one that everybody else is going, this is the person. It's often somebody that's later or somebody that's looked down upon, and that keeps happening. But that gets us to Noah. We'll come back to Noah in just a second. And then we get this, the next chapter begins. You'd think, if you're just reading a story, you're like, okay, that got Noah's mentioned, that gets us to Noah, now we're going to talk about the flood. But before the flood, there's this really weird thing thrown in. And I've labeled it cosmic rebellion, and here's why. In the beginning, God created Adam and Eve, and the serpent tempted them and told them, you can be like God. You can be like the one who created you. You can be divine. You can be, there's this one that has more knowledge than you, than he's holding out on you. You can be like God. And so, Genesis 6, the sons of God saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful and they married them. Pastor Peter mentioned this last week. It's actually they took them, reminding us that this is the formula that happens with Adam and Eve and the fruit. And the Lord said, my spirit will not contend with human beings forever. They're mortal. Their days will be 120 years old. Here's what's happening. And as you read, it helps you understand more because it's going to happen again in a moment. But these are the sons of God. And there's so much we could say about this, and I'm not going to say anything about it. We'll say these are spiritual beings. They're not human beings. They're spiritual beings. And these spiritual beings rebel against God. And what they're doing is crossing the boundary between spiritual and physical. There's a distinction between spiritual and physical, and these created beings are trying to blur those lines. They're blurring the lines between heaven, whatever that is, where spiritual beings can be, and earth, where human beings are. They're creating, or they're trying to cross that separation. And they're not doing it by simple obedience to God. They're doing it by doing what looks like the best way in their eyes to do it. We'll come back to this in just a little bit, this cosmic rebellion. So then, chapters 6 through 8, the story that we're all familiar with, the flood, or many of us are familiar with, there's a flood that comes upon the earth. Now, the earth was corrupt in God's sight and was full of violence. God saw how corrupt the earth had become, for all the people had corrupted their ways. So God said to Noah, I'm going to put an end to all people, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. I'm surely going to destroy both them and the earth. I'm going to come back to the flood in a little bit, but I want to keep going through these 11 chapters of Genesis. The flood story ends, and Noah and his family get off the boat. And Noah builds an altar, and he makes a sacrifice to God, and the text says it's pleasing to God. And so we have here this one man who's saving the human line, this one man who is meant to be the way forward. And God said to Noah, never again will I curse the ground because of humans, even though every inclination of the human heart is evil from childhood. It's really interesting. God goes, so there was this flood, and the flood it completed its purpose, and so now human beings are better. No. He's like, I'm not going to do that again because the inclinations of the human heart are not to listen to God, but to do what they want to do. And so I'm not going to do what I did again. And this opens up all kinds of questions for me. that we're not going to talk about. But like, why is it seems as though God changed his mind. And we don't like to think of a God who changes their mind, but God goes, I'm not going to do this way. This is not how it's going to go moving forward. And so you get to this point. Here's Noah. Here's the offspring of the woman. Here's a human being. And this one person makes a sacrifice. This one person makes a sacrifice that's pleasing to God and intercedes. Is this the human? Is this the offspring that's finally going to do the right thing and crush the head of the serpent? The curse, God said the curse is taken away. I'm not going to give this curse anymore. The curse is taken away. Not by what the people did, but by what this one man did. And if you're familiar at all with the Bible, that like the alarm bells that scream Jesus should be going off in your head. Is it Noah? Is he the guy? Is he the one man that will crush the serpent's head? Then God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, be fruitful, increase in number, and fill the earth. Right? It's a repeat of the command that were given to Adam and Eve in the garden. Right? Be fruitful and multiply. Noah, a man of the soil, proceeded to plant a vineyard. When he drank some of its wine, he became drunk and lay uncovered in his tent. Ham, the father of Canaan, saw his father naked and wanted to make an Instagram post about it and shame his father. But Shem and Japheth took a garment and covered Noah. Okay, so we have a garden scene where somebody takes the fruit, makes a bad choice, ends up naked, and someone comes and covers them with a garment. Where have we heard that before? Right? The beginning of the story. Adam and Eve do this thing. They are in a garden. They end up naked. God comes and he makes garments for them to cover them. So as we're reading this story, you should be going, oh, I've read this before. It was just a couple pages ago when something exactly like this happened. It's not Noah. Noah's not the one that's going to fix the problem. Noah's not the one that's going to take away the curse of sin. Noah's not the one that's going to crush the serpent's head. He made a bad choice also. And then what happens is Noah turns to his sons and he blesses the two and curses the one. And he actually says to the one, you're going to be enslaved to your brothers. Sometimes I tell my kids which one is my favorite. And it switches, and they both know it. So it's not like this. This is not a good parenting move, okay? I don't claim to be an expert parent, but I am going to throw out to you, cursing your kids and telling one of them that they're going to be enslaved to the other, probably not high on the list of good things to do as a parent. Next chapter, another genealogy. Whew. And this one is worse. And by worse, I mean it's longer and there's more names you can't pronounce. And you're like, okay, I can skip past this one. Where did it start? Where did it end? What's included? And so it lists all these descendants of Abraham's sons, right? And in this list is Israel, in this list of people who will come from these three sons. But also in the list, later in the Bible, Israel will go into the land of Canaan. We just heard that name a moment ago in the verse that we read. But Canaan, and they encounter a bunch of different people groups and tribes and kingdoms and blah, blah, blah. The people that Israel will encounter are also in this list, in this genealogy. And so the point that's being made, or at least one of the points that's being made in this genealogy, is what began as a family dispute turns into national warfare. What began as a family dispute between Ham, Shem, and Japheth turns into national warfare, global conflict, at least regional, right? This region of the world. These sons have descendants who end up fighting against each other. And so brokenness, sin, and rebellion, and evil, and suffering are just multiplying at an exponential level. And so what begins as two people in a garden choosing what's good in their eyes is now nations choosing what looks good in their eyes, and it's leading to brokenness, suffering, sin, and evil. Last chapter for today. Label it cosmic rebellion again. People, this is a famous story. People come together. And this time it's human beings rather than spiritual beings. Human beings say, you know what, we're pretty great. Let's do something that shows our greatness. And it says it literally in the text. Let's build this tower that reaches to the heavens. Let's build this tower that crosses the line from human to heaven. Let's build this thing that gets us to this place that we want to go, right? In the garden, the space between heaven and earth, there wasn't space between heaven and earth. God was with the human beings in the center of this garden. They sinned, they're sent out of this garden. And here are people attempting to get back to that place where the separation between earth and heaven, the separation between human and divine, there's no longer a separation there. We're going to build this thing. We're going to do this thing that looks good in our eyes. We're trying to bring heaven and earth together, not by simple obedience to God, but by choosing what we think looks best, right? And the cycle continues, and the cycle continues. So I've described some of the high points, and I want to have you just see it in an outline form so you can see what's actually happening. Right? Adam and Eve are created. There's an instance of creation. Adam and Eve are told to increase in number, be fruitful, and multiply. And they fail, and there's a garden scene with sin and nakedness. The next generation comes along, and that generation comes unhinged, and brother kills brother. And then there's cosmic rebellion. It's the spiritual beings taking human wives. And then there's another instance of decreation and recreation, the flood. The flood... We'll get there in just a second. The flood is this story of God is destroying all sorts of things on the world. But Noah comes through and God tells Noah and his sons to be fruitful and increase in number. Right? It's this story of recreation. The very next scene is failure that includes a garden scene where there's sin and nakedness. And the next generation after that comes unhinged, and brother is going to be enslaved to brother. And then there's a genealogy. And then there's cosmic rebellion, humans building a tower to reach to the heavens, to bridge that divide, to do away with that separation. Next week, we're going to talk about Abraham. And Abraham is this story again of God telling somebody, your number is going to increase and you're going to bless the whole world. And it's the same story happening again, right? This cycle is continuing. And when we choose as human beings to not listen to the voice of God and to listen to other voices and choose what looks good in our own eyes, sin, rebellion, brokenness, and suffering just increases. And it increases exponentially. So it's a good old-fashioned 3-point sermon if you're going to take notes. The first one is when Jesus teaches us to pray, your will be done, what you desire, not what we desire. That's not just something nice to say. It actually limits evil in the world when we submit ourselves to that prayer. When we go, I want what you want. I want your kingdom, not what my little kingdom. I want what you desire, God, not what I desire. I want your wishes to be carried out on the earth as it is in heaven. When we pray that and submit ourselves to that prayer, it limits evil in the world, and it keeps evil in check, because otherwise it increases exponentially. So now we got to talk about the flood. I don't know why. I guess it's because it's animals, maybe. But this is like the first story kids learn. This is not a cute, warm, fuzzy story. Like, it scares the life out of us. It should. God going, whew, I need to put an end to this. And this is actually, here's the reason I include that picture of Cohen Carr, and he's so amazing. This is the reason I included that picture, because when you zoom in on the details and don't zoom out and look at the full picture, it becomes very unnerving. And this story, the fact that this story exists, has caused people to walk away from faith in God because of this story. And on one hand, I don't blame them. And it's caused people to create, this is a literal book, awkward moments not found in your average children's Bible. And you can see there's people floating, and puppies and kitties. No one cares about the cat, but there's puppies there. It's a little unnerving, right? And if you don't pay attention to the larger picture, the story of the flood will be very disturbing. And what I'm going to say this morning isn't going to clear it up, but I hope to at least back us up so we can look at it a little differently. And it's only then, as you hold this story together with the rest of the Scripture, it's only as you look at this story and what's being communicated in the part of the Bible that it's in, these first 11 chapters, and you see that it's part of a cycle, it's only as you zoom out and look at all of it together that you can begin to make sense of it, and you see the God that's revealed through the rest of the Scriptures, that it can begin to make any sort of sense. So let's talk a little bit about the flood. Biblical literature has these things in them called chiasms. Chi, meaning chi is the Greek letter X, right? And it's just visually describing something that we find in literature. And these are all throughout Genesis, in the stories of Genesis. I just showed you one in particular where, you see this back and forth nature that's happening in these first 11 chapters, right? And so the chiasm is where you'll be reading along and you encounter something, and then later in the narrative, you encounter something else that is parallel to thing A that you read before. And then there's B and C, or however the chiasm is built. They differ. But the point is, in these chiastic structures, there's a center point. And the center point is something that you're supposed to find. You're supposed to go, ooh, this is one of those things. And when you see one the first time yourself that no one's told you about before, you're going to feel so I just won Jeopardy, right? Except without the money. You're going to feel so good. But there's a center point, and in the center point, there's a detail. And the detail is communicating something very important to you about how to view the story. And these are all over the Hebrew Scriptures, okay, the Old Testament. And in this story, you can get there. There's verses here going back to Genesis 5 and then ahead to Genesis 10. That's the genealogy. And the first one in the black is gene. And yes, by the way, I'm stealing quite liberally from the Bible Project. This is their graphic. But anyways, you work yourself. There's also some numbers. As you're reading the story of the flood, there's numbers on either side, and you can use numbers to get there. But the middle of the story, whether you use the numbers or the passages on either side, the middle of the story is Genesis 8, verse 1. And so let's look at Genesis 8, verse 1. God remembered Noah and all the wild animals and the livestock that were with him in the ark, and he sent a wind over the earth, and the waters receded. Now, as you become familiar with the Bible, you read this verse and you're like, oh, here's human beings together with animals, and there's these waters of chaos and the Spirit. See, the word in Hebrew, the word for wind and the word for spirit are the same. It means breath. And here's the Spirit hovering over the waters, and the chaos waters go away. God brings order to what is chaos in the world. And here's this one man together with the animals, and they're floating on the water, and suddenly God remembered him. It's not because God had forgot. This word remembered is the same as remember the Sabbath, right? It's God observed. God is taking account of Noah. And you read this and you're like, this is the same thing that happened in verse 1 and 2 of the Bible. This is a new creation story. And you get to, And then some people have recognized that as you read the story of the flood, you see these things where what God created and ordered on the first day is decreated. And you're like, oh, well, there's a 7-day structure here, like there's a 7-day structure in the beginning. Well, if you follow the 7-day structure, then you're like, what's the seventh day? And the seventh day is that God stopped. He said, I'm not going to destroy anymore. God stopped. That's what Sabbath literally means, to stop. And what stops in this story is that God stopped destroying. And he said, I'm not going to do that again. And so it's hard to see past the destruction of the flood. I get that. But there's a bigger picture, and there's something else that's being told. I recently got to have a conversation with a middle school student from Eastside. And this middle school student had recently heard the story of the flood, and I was like, well, how'd you feel about that? And the student said to me, well, what I took away from it was that if there's one person that's seeking to please God, God will make a way. If there's one person that's seeking to please God, God will make a way. And the middle school student taught me something, because that was never my takeaway from the flood story. My takeaway was always like, how do we make sense of this? What's going on? Like, blah, 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 blah. If there's one person that's seeking to please God, God will make a way. All right, now we're getting really deep. Okay. I've got to be quick with this. In the beginning, God creates human beings. He puts them in, there's a 3-tiered structure. He creates the earth. He puts the human being, they're in Eden. That's the first part of the 3-tiered structure. They're in Eden. But in Eden, there's a garden. And in that garden, there's a center of the garden out of which a river flows, which means it's a high point. And in that garden, he puts Adam and Eve and some trees. Okay? Those are the 3 tiers. The third tier, I don't know why they didn't draw it like a boat, but the image on the right, the third, second, lower, that's a representation of the ark. As you read the story of the ark, the construction of the ark, there's a lower, a middle, and an upper portion of the ark. And the ark is made out of gopher wood. Weird. Nobody knows what gopher wood is. They actually can't find it. But I think it's just a play on words, because what they're supposed to do with this gopher wood is covered inside and out with gopher, pitch. And it's just it's a rhyming mechanism in the structure of the story. They're to cover it inside and out with pitch. It's supposed to be this many cubits by this many cubits. You cover it inside and out with pitch. Later in the story, we'll get to Exodus, and God instructs the people to create a tabernacle, and the tabernacle is constructed with 3 tiers. Except it's not like height tiers, but 3 different sections. There's the outer court. And then there's an inner court that's a holy place. And then there's an inner court. It's the holy of holy place. And in that holy of holy place, there's something called the Ark of the Covenant. Now, this is technical. It's not the same term. Ark, the boat, and ark, the box in the holy of place, they're not the same words. But English translators of the Bible have recognized over time that these two are being lined up together to show you something, right? And that Ark of the Covenant is covered inside and out with gold, like the boat is covered inside and out with pitch. And the top of that box is covered with a kopher seat, an atonement seat, and it's a homonym. It's not the same as the pitch that's on the ark, but it's the same word pronounced the same way. Adam and Eve were guarded from going back into the garden by this winged creature, a cherubim. Inside the tabernacle, there's these winged creatures there's these depictions of these winged creatures. And what the tabernacle is, the Holy of Holies, is a place where people would go, the high priest would go once a year to be in God's presence, right? The center of the garden, that's where God's presence was. There was no separation between God's presence and the people. There was no separation between heaven and earth. They're together. the Holy of Holies. That's where the presence of God is with the people. There is no separation between heaven and earth. And then there's this boat that's making a way through the chaos waters, and we're supposed to see them all lined up together. But there is this separation. Everything after Genesis 3 shows this separation between God's presence and the people, between heaven and earth being together until Matthew, Mark, and Luke all describe the same thing when Jesus is crucified. The curtain in the temple where these depictions of the cherubim are, the curtain is torn. And it doesn't explain it. It just says the curtain is torn. And as you read the Bible, you're supposed to go, oh, I know what's happening. That space between heaven and earth, that space between God's presence and me, that space between God's presence and us is gone. And there's a new creation. And the church is born, and the church, Jesus tells the disciples that my Spirit will come on you, and no longer will there be this separation between us. And the church is meant to be the working model of heaven and earth come together. The church is the working model of heaven and earth come together. And we're not going to experience it in its fullness yet. But that doesn't mean that it's not true. And this separation, this thing that was separating humans from the garden, it's gone. This thing that was separating humans from the Holy of Holies, it's gone. And the way through the chaos waters is opened up. And that's the bigger picture of what's happening. But you've got to read it all. And you've got to familiarize yourself with it all so that you can see the big picture of what's happening. And heaven and earth are brought together, and the people of God are to recognize, oh, we're a new creation. We demonstrate what it's like to live in communion with God. We demonstrate what it's like to live where that separation between God and us is no longer there. We live in that place where heaven and earth are brought together through Jesus. And that's why we celebrate communion every week. That's why we celebrate communion every week, because we're going to remind ourselves that because of Jesus, that way is opened up. That separation is gone. That distance between us and God is no longer there. And the New Testament writers, the apostles, understood this. So in 1 Peter 3, Peter's writing, and he reminds the people about the flood, and he compares it to baptism. And he goes, look, what Jesus did, what we're celebrating, to be baptized into Jesus' name, is to recognize that this separation is gone. Not because we figured out a way to build a tower, not because we figured out the best way to be most like God. No, because God came to us. And so Jesus gave his life so that we could experience heaven and earth. We could be part of this working model of new creation unleashed and at work in the world. And what better thing to do than remember that every week? And so we're going to celebrate communion. And communion is for those who have given themselves to Jesus and saying, Jesus is the way through. I'm not going to do what looks good in my eyes. I'm going to listen to God's voice as I do this. And so the ushers will come and dismiss you by rows. And you can go and receive the elements, take them back to your seat, and Pastor Peter will come and lead us through the words of communion. Would you pray with me? God, we are so grateful that the way has been opened up for us. We are so grateful that the distance between you and us is done away with by Jesus. God, it's easy to get lost in the details. Would you remind us of the story that you're telling through the scriptures, of your goodness, that what you created is good, that we rebel, but you're going to make a way for us in spite of our rebellion. You're compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in truth and long-suffering mercy. You forgive wickedness, rebellion, and sin, and so we look to Jesus, the author, the finisher of our faith. God, we love you. We give you praise. We ask all these things in the name of Christ our Lord. Amen. I'll be at the side if you want to pray, or there'll be an elder over here if you'd like to pray either before or instead of communion. We'd love to pray with you and simply ask God to bless you with his presence. Eastside, the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face towards you and give you peace. Amen.
We have the joy of gathering together each week to remember and celebrate the answer to the question that Pastor Matt named is in Genesis from the beginning and throughout. Is this the guy? Is this the seed that's going to deliver us? Is this the one that will bring us through? Will this story, this person, this account be the way that God opens up a way through chaos and sin and death into redemption? God provides a way through the chaos waters, through destruction. We see this story played out again in Moses, in the ark, delivered through the sea. We see him leading a people through the chaos waters of the Red Sea. We see this again happening as the Jordan separates and God's people walk into the promised land, this land that God would provide. And then again, we see at Jesus' baptism reenacting this same story in the Jordan, in the water, the heavens now open, and the Spirit of God descends like a dove, and a voice from heaven declares, "This is my Son, in whom I am well pleased." Jesus is the one who provides, and in the supper, celebrating those events, this redemption, he invites us to remember him and practice this repeatedly. And so on the night that he was betrayed, he took the bread as he was celebrating the people's deliverance, and he says, "This is my body, which is broken for you." So family, take, eat, remembering. And then he takes the cup, which is the fruit of the vine. And he passes it out, and he prays, and he blesses it. And he gives it to his disciples, and he says, "This now will be a new covenant in my blood." So family, take and drink. Whenever we receive the bread and we receive the cup, we are declaring joyfully Jesus' death and resurrection, that he is the guy, he is the one to redeem until he comes again. And so at Eastside, we end our time with the Lord's Prayer as such a great reminder of what Pastor Matt said. Every time we pray the Lord's will, we're participating. So if you would stand and say this prayer with me, we'll end our time here together. Feel free to say this in the cadence, whether it's English, Creole, Spanish, or whatever language is best for you. Let's say this together as our benediction, as our declaration, and as our prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven,
hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our sins, as we forgive those who sin against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever.
As you prepare to leave today, I just wanted to make one clarification about the concert that the Soil and the Seed Project is having this afternoon. We talked about the workshop we're going to have for families. I just want to clarify, the Soil and Seed Project is for everyone. And the concert today that we're going to be doing is the most recent collection, Matthew, which is actually available out here. If you can't come to the concert, grab the CD and the liturgies that go with it. But we're going to play all 30 songs that tell the story of the Gospel of Matthew. It's 75 minutes. We're going to play the songs from start to finish so you can hear that story of Jesus. And we'd love for you to come. And we'll have artwork during the concert as well and all of the things that come from this collection. If you have questions about it, please let me know. But we'd love to see you there.
Let's close by finishing. We'll sing this last chorus that we just did during communion. Oh, the goodness of Jesus, satisfied, he is all that I need. May it become what may, that I rest all my days in the goodness of Jesus. May it become what may, that I rest all my days in the goodness of Jesus. Thanks for choosing to worship with us this week. We hope to see you next week.